I've been riding motorcycles for 19 years now, and I've had a bunch of different motorcycles during that period of time. You might want to check out my video, The Motorcycles I Have Loved, and one I didn't. Most of my riding has been in cities, and most of that riding has been commuting from home to work, going shopping, bopping out to the restaurant, going to the movies. What's the one thing I've never done? I've never toured long distance on a motorcycle. And these days, everything you see in motorcycle magazines, on motorcycle vlogs, in fact, everywhere I look, it seems that all people are talking about is adventure bikes and long distance touring. And I've never done any of that. So does that mean I'm not a real rider? If I haven't toured, can I even call myself a motorcyclist? I've been in China for about a month now and going to be here for about another 2 weeks. And so I haven't had a bike to ride for a while and won't have until I get back to the United States. But I was noticing that here in Sanya, it seems that at least 50% of the vehicles on the road are small scooters. And they are not just delivery people, they are normal transportation for most people. I have seen couples and families. I've even seen whole families, mom, pop, and 2 little kids all together on the same scooter. People here use motorcycles as daily transportation, as their only transportation, and there are scooters everywhere. Here's just a look at the parking outside of a shopping mall. Scooters completely up and down, packed in as tight as you can pack them. And there are scooter lanes specifically for the people riding scooters so they don't have to ride in the middle of the regular street. And they are constantly busy with people moving through. And as you can see, it's just all kinds of people. Couples, ladies, families. There's a dad with his 2 kids on a scooter. Everybody rides scooters. It is the way to get around. To understand motorcycle usage, we have to go back in time. There have been motorcycles now for about 140 years, and in the early part of the 20th century, the first production motorcycles began to appear. How did people use motorcycles then? Well, it was a big upgrade from bicycles as personal transportation, and so initially, people who actually rode early motorcycles were using them for transportation. Of course, there were also people racing and speed trials, and there were even people going cross-country, but that was more to prove endurance, both of the machine and the person, not really for enjoyment of traveling. In the United States, motorcycles were also used for postal delivery and for commercial delivery. This was in an era before automobiles were common. In World War I and World War II, motorcycles were used for fast travel and communication, sending dispatch riders with messengers to the front. And of course, Royal Enfield famously made the Flying Flea, which could be dropped from an airplane to troops on the ground. After World War II, in the United States, motorcycle culture came to be identified sort of with the risky, the outlaw behavior, the wild ones. Whereas in Europe, they were more likely to be used as daily transportation because automobiles in Europe were much less common than they were in the United States. The United States, people used their automobiles because there were greater distances to travel, and motorcycles came to be used mostly for leisure and entertainment. Today, motorcycles are still used for leisure and entertainment, but of course they're also used for commuting. But that tends to be in cities where it's crowded and motorcycles are therefore useful, and also where the weather makes it possible to ride year-round. I started riding in Los Angeles, which ticks both of those boxes. It's surprisingly difficult to find statistics on motorcycle usage in the United States, but we have some clues. In my earlier video, Why Aren't Lane Filtering and Lane Splitting Legal in All States?, I cite a report from the University of California at Berkeley on lane splitting riders, and that report found some interesting things. it found that lane-splitting riders were much more likely to be commuters than to be weekend riders or entertainment riders. The lane-splitting riders were more likely to be wearing helmets than others, and indeed better helmets, were less likely to be carrying a passenger, were more likely to be traveling at slower speeds, and were much less likely to be using alcohol before they rode. In other words, they were using their bikes as daily transportation. Certainly that's what I did in Los Angeles. That UC Berkeley study is backed up by a study released in 2024 by the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, which also found some similarities about riders who we might think of as being mostly riding for entertainment. What were those statistics? Fascinatingly, that study from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration found that in 1975, and I'm checking my notes here, 80% of motorcycle fatalities were riders who were under 30 years old. But by 2019, that had dropped to only 28%. But by comparison, in 1975, only 3% of motorcycle fatalities were people who were 50 or older, but that group, fatalities soared by 2019 all the way up to 37%. So what's happening here? Well, I think what we're finding is that the usage of motorcycles has changed and the demographic of motorcycle users has changed. People 50 and older are the ones now more likely to get involved in serious accidents, and probably people 50 and older are less likely to be using their bikes as daily transportation, as commuting. The National Highway Report found that 64% of fatalities among riders on cruiser bikes and 80% of fatalities among riders on touring bikes were again in that 40 or older category. Again, probably not commuters. The National Highway Report found that 49% of those involved in fatalities, 40 and older, were not wearing helmets at all. And alcohol played a major role, and riders riding at night were much more likely to be under the influence of alcohol. Speed, of course, also had a major play in that. And all of that ties in to show that probably the riders getting into the most serious accidents are not only older, but are not really riding at commuting times, and they're not showing the behavior that the UC Berkeley study found for lane-splitting commuting motorcyclists. Wearing better helmets, driving at lower speeds, not carrying a passenger, not using alcohol. All of those things are found in the 40 and 50-year-olds who are getting involved in serious accidents. That, to me, tells me that riders probably are using them more for leisure and entertainment than for commuting, for daily transportation. So does that make me an anomaly? As an American, I've never cruised the big interstate highways. I have always used my bikes for commuting, for riding around town. If I'm not out there riding my big cruiser bike on the big highways, am I really a real rider? This brings to mind a book from Neil Peart, who was not only a great drummer for the rock band Rush, but was also a very avid motorcyclist and a great author, and he wrote several books about riding. And one of those books, Ghost Rider, he talks about a very long cross-country trip across Canada and across the United States. And while he was on that trip, he began to be concerned about his brake pads. So he called up a mechanic in a town he was coming to, and he asked about that. And the mechanic said, well, how old is the bike? And Neil Peart said, it's 3 years old. And the mechanic dismissed it and said, well, you don't have any problem then. But then the mechanic said, how many miles have you got on that bike? And when Neil Peart said more than 40,000 miles in 3 years, suddenly the mechanic gave him more respect. What the mechanic said was, oh, you're a rider. You're a real rider. And suddenly, as Neil Peart wrote, he became worthy of the mechanic's respect. Why? Simply because he was riding the highways and putting lots of miles on his bike. If I'm not riding the highways, if I'm not putting that kind of mileage on my motorcycles, Does that mean I'm not worthy of respect as a real rider? Pondering these issues, I began to realize that there's a deeper problem here. Motorcyclists tend to get slotted into certain categories. Oh, you're a sport bike rider. Oh, you're a cruiser, highway rider. Ah, you are into retro or classic bikes. I'm not sure that's fair to do that. If you ride a motorcycle, you're a motorcyclist. Let's face it, it's not a casual thing to learn how to ride in the first place. It requires some training. It requires a lot of practice. It's not like learning to drive a car. In an automatic car, it's point and shoot. Even in a manual shift car, it's not that difficult. Yes, you have to learn how to coordinate the clutch and the gas, and of course deal with the third pedal, the brake pedal, but otherwise the car is pretty stable because of the four wheels. But on a motorcycle, you have to not only learn how to handle that clutch, along with the gas, how to shift the gears, you also have to learn how to balance the bike, how to balance braking using both the front and the rear brakes, how to lean in the curves. All of this takes much more learning and practice than driving a car. And so if you're a rider, you've learned all those things, and you fall into a special category of vehicles on the road. And as riders, it doesn't really matter where or how we ride. I'm just as much a rider using my bike only for commuting and in-town transportation as someone who's using their big motorcycle for cruising along the highways, or someone who's using their sport bike for canyon carving. We're all riders, and we're all worthy of respect. We should all respect each other. And generally we do. We give that little nod, that little wave of the hand as we pass each other on the road. I pull up next to another motorcyclist at the traffic light. There I am on my Moto Guzzi V7, and he's next to me on his big Harley. We acknowledge each other. We give each other the respect because we're both bikers. So if you have a bike, just ride it. Whether you use it only for commuting, whether you use it only on the weekends for entertainment, whether you're out there doing some dirt riding, whether you are going coast to coast on the interstates, it's all good. Let's celebrate motorcycling in all its forms. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And I will see you in the next one.